Good afternoon, my lovely, lovely peeps, my students and colleagues and friends. This is Dr. Maya. I have just found out, thanks to my mom, that a few of my friends from the Bengali community have also been enjoying and appreciating my videos. So I quickly wanted to say hola, নমস্কার। আশা করি আপনারা সবাই খুব খুব ভালো আছেন। এখানে এসে আপনারা ভিডিও শুনছেন, খুব ভালো লাগছে। In English, that means I hope you're all well, and it is really wonderful that you've been watching the videos and appreciating them. Today's topic is imposter syndrome. Ooh, ooh, that's a big one. And I'm smiling because the moment I started doing these videos, the first few, I was so much more casual about it. It was doing it for fun. And I'm still definitely doing it for fun because I wouldn't be doing these otherwise. But I've been noticing the scripts starting to speak up just a little. Why do you want to do this? Who's going to want to listen? You really don't quite know if it matters to anyone. And because of my training and counseling, I have had the capacity to pay attention to those thoughts. In one of my previous videos, I talked about self-talk as compassionate talk. And I also am going to expand that because a lot of what goes into managing imposter syndrome is managing the unhelpful, negative thinking. I want to make it clear from the beginning that there is an internal component to imposter syndrome. What's going on inside of us? What are the thoughts that we may have that we don't always even know we are having? Because of those thoughts, what kind of emotions are being created? And because of the thoughts and emotions, what kind of behavioral choices we make, both productive and unproductive. And then there's an external component. Right? The world can be a pretty cruel place. We all know this living in the world of social media. It's very easy to watch something or hear something and write a comment and hit send that may be devastating to the recipient. So I do not ever want to undermine the impact of the situation, the larger context, the social political context where we live and breathe, and also the historical contexts from which we arrive, from where we have grown up, the cultural scripts we have in our heads. All of that, there is an entirely external part to imposter syndrome. People are difficult and mean and harsh and sadly often don't want others to grow. Along with that part, which I would say is about 30%, 70% of understanding and working with some imposter syndrome is really here. It's the mental scripts. What happens when we understand the mental scripts and how we deal helpfully with those mental scripts? One of my favorite ways of being in the world, the work I do in the world, is about removing barriers. I use that as a hashtag very often. Over the years, as I've done my work as an educator, as a teacher, as a counselor, I have come to understand that a lot of stuckness in terms of career success, academic success, financial success, life success, is about understanding the barriers and then finding and practicing the tools to remove them. Understanding is one piece of it, the what and the why. And then the how is how are we going to remove the barriers that are getting in the way of helping us move from point A to point B. So, imposter syndrome is one of those many, many, many barriers that our minds put in place to a significant extent, along with the external system, so that we are unable to work from or live from a place where we are doing whatever it is we are doing with a lot of joy, right? And I'm a big fan of joy. I believe that it is important to have light and joy in life. And that is a very hard-earned lesson. It's not a lesson that was just like, woohoo, I'm not a person who does panacea kind of ideas, everything's fine all the time. No, life is hard, and yet we have a spirit, and there is access to joy, and it is hard work to access it. But when we are there, most people do understand the concept of flow. When you're completely in a project, you are just totally immersed in it, and you are not thinking about the future or the past. So, imposter syndrome is one of those mental and situational barriers that get in the way of us being in that place of joy and flow, and therefore often success. Imposter syndrome, in a very simplistic sense, and I absolutely do not mean to make this simple because it's a real and complex concern. It boils down to this feeling and thinking at the same time that I am not good enough, I don't belong here in the classroom, at the table, at the job. Imposter syndrome is this mental script that keeps telling us, I don't belong, I'm here by mistake, I'm going to get caught out, I'm going to be found out, and I'm going to get kicked out of the room, out of the classroom, out of the boardroom. For folks who are managing a lot of that fear from the imposter syndrome, then don't have access to that energy to put into the academic work and into the professional work. It becomes this cycle of the fear feeding lack of flow, and lack of flow feeding the fear. In cognitive behavioral therapy, we talk a lot about unhelpful thinking. There's a pretty long and comprehensive list of thinking traps. One of the most common ones is mind reading. We have this tendency in an untrained mind to believe that we know what other people are thinking. Now, as a very quick sidebar, there's a lot of biological reasons why we have the emotions we have: fear and anxiety, and whatever we label the negative feelings, which is not a very fair labeling. All those feelings that humans are not very comfortable with, if we take a step back and look at our evolutionary history, they have survived in the human genetic code for millions of years. And there has to be a reason for that, because in terms of evolution, whatever that is necessary stays, and whatever is not needed, like our vestigial tails for the human mammalian species, it goes away. So there is a space to respect and understand why those difficult feelings and emotions exist. They exist to protect us. Fear, fight or flight, the sense of anxiety, what ifs, all of those feelings have helped us as a species to survive in pretty challenging situations. The challenge now is we don't live in caves anymore, and we are an industrialized species. There is the limbic system, the reptilian brain part of us, which is again millions of years old, whose job is to keep us alive physically. Things, feelings, and emotions of the nature of fear, terror, worry, anxiety, not wanting to move out of comfort zone, not wanting to do anything scary. Those are all built in place to keep us alive as a species. In the modern world we exist in, however, a lot of those primitive brain mechanisms don't always fit very well. A second part of evolution is our prefrontal cortex, which is the seat of reasoning and altruism and compassion and a lot of those non-visceral behaviors. The difference between seeing a spider and just wanting to stomp it, and seeing the spider and taking a second to say, okay, that's a teeny tiny spider. It's probably not going to harm me, so I'm just going to walk away. Those are the two parts of our brains at work, the primitive brain and the more logical, reasonable brain. Neither is bad or good. They both have their place. First off, it's unwise to say my emotions are a problem, because no, without those emotions we wouldn't be here. Not knowing how to manage those emotions, any emotion in extreme, that can be a problem. With imposter syndrome, one of the things that happens with the thinking traps is the negative thinking kicks in as a mechanism of self-protection initially. If I am put in a place where I am feeling unsafe, for example, the first time I walked into a classroom and I had these wonderful young students sitting there and looking at me and saying, okay, you're the teacher, you're gonna, teach. And not at just that moment, but for a long time, and off and on even now, I have this thought of who made me the grown-up, right? Who said I could teach. So understanding that that's coming from a place of mental protection, that humans do not like chaos. We do not like feeling uncomfortable. We do not like feeling that we are at risk. Right? One piece of imposter syndrome is understanding that the feeling of fear and anxiety, of not being good enough, of nobody wanting me here, at the level of unhelpful thinking, those are actually trying to protect us physically. But it's not enough, right? And so this is where we move into a little bit of understanding thinking traps and also understanding how to counter them. I'm going to talk about that more at length in another video. But the point I want to make here is, if you are experiencing these thoughts that they're going to catch me out, and who do I think I am? I don't deserve to be here. We can respect those thoughts. We can respect the feelings that the thoughts are generating. And then we can find ways to reframe those thoughts. This is where data becomes very important. I'll give an example from my own life. When I was in graduate school, I had started at Drew University in 2000. Come from Calcutta, India. I had no clue how the US academic system works. I, caught on pretty quickly, but it was definitely a lot of, oh my God, this is wrong, I'm in the wrong place. All those thoughts that would then stop me from actually studying, because the fear of failing would take over. However, I kept studying and doing well until my third semester. I had straight A's at the end of the semester. The first couple of semesters, a couple of A minuses, B's, B pluses. But my third semester was a straight A, 3 subjects. So in all my insecurities and complete conviction that I know myself best, I went to my academic advisor and I told her there's something wrong with this situation. And she said, what? And I said, I'm not that smart to have 3 A's. There's something off. I will never forget the lesson my advisor taught me that day. She sat me down in her office and she said, I'm going to tell you this and I'm going to ask you to think very carefully about your response. So 3 different professors who are all tenured, are well published in their fields, are seasoned teachers who probably amongst the 3 of them have 40 plus years of teaching experience. 3 separate top-notch faculty members have given you A's, and one of them is me. You were in my class. You are assuming that something is off and that you don't deserve those A's. What you are saying is either that we don't know what we are doing as your professors, we don't really know how to assess which work is A quality and which isn't, or you're saying that all of us are lying, that there's some nefarious agenda we have and we are giving you the A even though you don't deserve it. So you have to choose which narrative you want to pick. Do we not know our jobs or are we liars? That moment has been germane in my spiritual growth as well as professional growth. Because yes, of course, in my entire life, I had people say I'm good. There, as much as there were negative cultural feedback, which everyone experiences, that's a universal experience. I had grown up with a decent amount of supportive, positive experience as well. But somewhere deep down, there was always this self-questioning. And there I was, about 26 years old at this point. I had this person call me out on my bullshit. And she said, when people tell you you're good at something and they don't have an agenda and they know what they are doing, it's important to be humble enough and proud enough to accept that. Because walking around with the idea of being an imposter, again, can cut both ways. On the one hand, yes, it's protective. It makes us feel safe in terms of setting up a barrier that, okay, if I do fail the exam, I won't feel terrible because I've always known I'm an imposter. But the other part of it is giving up that narrative also takes courage, because giving up the narrative of being an imposter means claiming one's own selfhood, my level of intelligence, my level of competencies. And that's a whole other ballgame. This video, I want to leave with a couple of thoughts. One is, if you, like so many of us, are experiencing those thoughts of not being good enough, talk to a trusted person, talk to a mentor, talk to a faculty member, talk to someone you trust who has your best interests at heart. Ask them for honest feedback, honest assessment. And what they say, accept it. Don't question that person's feedback because of the imposter thoughts. Because at some point we have to find a way to remove the barrier of the hold that imposter voice has in us. And it does not want to let go. Right? It likes being there. Listening to folks who have your best interests at heart and accepting their feedback with humility and grace, then working on the same skills that you have been told this is what your strengths are. It's a lot about trust, about finding trustworthy people and then taking their feedback to heart. For example, after that incident, way back when, day to day situations where people say, I've done something well, or that I look very good in a particular outfit, or I'm bringing a lot of joy into the room and this is wonderful to be around. If it is something that's positive, I don't question it. I just take it because, hey, we all need more and more of that. That's one part of it, is getting data from people who are trusted and then working with those thinking traps and saying, I'm not going to believe that. I'm not going to believe the thought. I'm going to believe the other thought, which has come from the data I have acquired. And then there's the other piece of really working with the external. There are pressures in the world, and there are a lot of energies in the world that don't always want us to thrive and to succeed. It also then comes back to what's in my control. I really can't change the fact that there's a certain discrimination in the world vis-a-vis, let's say, gender. I know sexism exists. I have experienced it. I know people who have experienced it. It's not a denial of what is not equitable out there. It's also taking responsibility for my own part in doing what I have control over. One of those removing barrier strategies is to find people, your tribe, who are going to tell you what your strengths are, and then you're going to keep working on growing them. Another strategy is to learn to keep the toxicity out. We train our minds to say, yes, I'm sure that that person was being snarky, but I don't have to let my entire day get derailed because that person was snarky. There's a lot of power that comes from understanding that at the end of the day, to a significant level, we are responsible and in control of our choices and behaviors. This is a complex topic, but I wanted to talk to this topic because at this point with COVID going on, imposter syndrome is something that is a mini epidemic because people are already emotionally stressed out. And when their emotional strength is missing, then it becomes harder to keep our positive emotions up. Thinking about imposter syndrome, learning to track those unhelpful thoughts, learning to question them with the data we have received, and learning to not pay attention to the external negative thoughts that are either overtly or covertly coming at us. Those are 3 baby steps in figuring out how to take back ownership of our feeling that A, we are always good enough. Again, my students know my love for words and phrases. It's just a given. I'm good enough. I exist. I live an ethical life. I do things that contribute to society. I do things to grow myself in healthy ways and help others grow in healthy ways. I have friends, I support family, and they support me. I'm good enough. It's just accepting. There's no questioning of the good enoughness. 2, there is always space for growth in anybody. That doesn't mean that we don't belong. Learning to fight the thoughts, whether they're coming from inside of us or whether they're coming from externals, and becoming stronger in the helpful thinking practice so that when those negatives come, they don't impact us as much as when we are not trained to practice helpful thinking, right, and helpful behaviors. Thinking about your own experience with imposter syndrome, I would love to hear what folks have to say, where you have felt like an imposter, how you dealt with it, um, what kind of practices you have put in place to remove barriers in your own growth process in career success and academic success and life success. I would really, really love to hear from you. And that's it for today's talk. Again, this is Dr. Maya. Have a lovely, lovely Saturday afternoon. And, write to me. I want to hear from you. Bye.